Everyone in that small-town courtroom thought it would be just another forgettable Tuesday, until a 4-year-old boy clutched his toy sheriff badge, pointed at the most decorated cop in the room, and whispered 2 words that made grown men freeze. By the time the sun set, one child's innocent voice had cracked open a 20-year web of lies, stolen lives, and dirty badges. What he said next changed everything. It was the kind of gray Tuesday that settled over the town like a worn quilt, one of those days where nothing special ever seemed to happen, at least on the surface. The old county courthouse sat quiet as usual, its wooden benches groaning. With age, its portraits of long-gone judges watching like ghosts of justice. Hank Turner, a 67-year-old retired truck driver with hands like leather and a heart stitched together by grief, clutched his grandson Tommy's hand as they walked into that courtroom. Hank didn't want to be there. No one wants to testify in court, especially not after losing your only daughter to a so-called overdose just 8 months ago. But what choice did he have? Her house had been broken into, ransacked, her journals stolen, her locks broken, and now here he was, standing up for her, the only way he knew how. And little Tommy, just 4, with his messy hair and his mama's green eyes, didn't know any better. He just held on to his plastic toy sheriff badge like it meant something, like justice still meant something. Then came the moment that cracked the calm. As a tall, decorated officer in a crisp uniform entered the courtroom. Officer Buckley. You could feel the collective respect in the room. Buckley was a local legend. Medals on his chest. Smile like a politician. The man had personally shaken hands with 2 governors. But then Tommy froze. His fingers curled tightly around Hank's arm, and his lip quivered. And then, in the voice of a child barely past his ABCs, he whispered those 2 words that tore the silence in half. Bad man. Hank looked down, confused. What, buddy? But Tommy wasn't joking, wasn't distracted. His little hand raised slowly, like it was guided by something ancient and pure. He pointed straight at Officer Buckley. He hurt Mommy, he said, loud enough that the clerk dropped her pen, and someone in the back gasped. The courtroom didn't move. Buckley's grin disappeared like a switch had been flipped. His boots clicked louder than before. Judge Miriam Collins, sharp as ever at 71 and known for not suffering fools, locked eyes with him. She'd seen men lie under oath, break down on the stand, but she'd never seen a child look that certain, that scared, that sure. The judge, sensing something rotten just beneath the polished floor, called for a recess. But she didn't just dismiss the court. She ordered Officer Buckley into her chambers. Behind that thick oak door, her questions were precise, calm, but cutting. Buckley deflected, said he didn't know the child, had never met Hank's daughter. But his hands were too still, his breath came too fast. And meanwhile, outside, one of the clerks leaned close to Hank and whispered something that made the blood drain from his face. Buckley had been the responding officer at his daughter's house the night she died, but no report was ever filed. Hank's ears rang. He remembered the detective saying she must have just given up. But his daughter hadn't been a quitter. She'd been scared. She said so in the last voicemail she ever left him. And now this? Now Tommy, who could barely tie his shoes, was pointing at a man the whole town trusted like a priest, calling him a monster. Judge Collins didn't waste time. She quietly called in an old friend, a retired deputy named Milt, who now spent his days fixing fences and drinking cheap beer. Milt had always had a problem with how Buckley rose so fast through the ranks. Said it didn't smell right. That night, Milt delivered a dusty manila folder to the judge's office, one that had been sealed and forgotten years ago. Inside were photos, affidavits, and one complaint from a rookie cop who'd accused Buckley of planting drugs on suspects and doctoring crime scenes. Nothing had ever come of it. But now, pieced together with what Tommy said and what Hank remembered, the pieces started falling into place like cursed dominoes. Buckley wasn't just dirty. He was meticulous, and he had a pattern. The very next morning, whispers began spreading like wildfire through the town's rusted diner booths and church basements. Other people, mostly older, mostly dismissed over the years, began speaking out. A retired math teacher who lost her pension in a police-led foreclosure. A blind veteran whose home was raided on a mistaken tip, and who had always insisted. The officer in charge had a scar just like Buckley's. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. But no one wanted to believe it because Buckley wore the badge. And in towns like theirs, the badge was holy. You didn't question the man with the gun and the radio, not unless you were ready to be called crazy. Or worse, criminal. But then came the storm. Someone, no one quite knows who, leaked footage from the courtroom to a local news outlet. The moment Tommy pointed, the words he said, it hit the evening news, and by morning it had gone national. Child points at officer, says he hurt mommy, investigation launched. And suddenly, the courthouse was surrounded not just by reporters, but by federal agents. Body cam footage from Buckley's patrols had mysteriously gone missing. But the judge, God bless her, wasn't backing down. She demanded every scrap of evidence be turned over. And when Buckley tried to skip town, his car was stopped 3 counties over. Inside were burner phones, an unregistered pistol, and over $90,000 in cash. What followed was a reckoning. Autopsies were reopened. One in particular, Hank's daughter, revealed she'd been sedated with a powerful compound used only in high-level arrests, not recreational overdoses. The thefts, the raids, the seizures, it all connected. Buckley had orchestrated a ring of targeted abuse. He chose victims who couldn't fight back, the old, the broke, the isolated, and he made sure he was the one who wrote the reports. The system trusted him, and he played it like a fiddle. Hank, staring at the photos and evidence, wept, not out of relief, but out of rage, because for nearly a year he'd been told to accept a lie, that his daughter just checked out. But she hadn't. She'd been hunted, and his grandson, her child, had remembered what no one else did. The town was never the same after that. How could it be? They tore down the precinct and rebuilt it with federal oversight. Judge Collins pushed through a bill requiring third-party reviews for every case involving forfeiture or death. And the old courthouse wall now holds a bronze statue, a little boy in overalls, one finger pointed upward. The plaque beneath reads, "The truth, as told by a child." Tommy doesn't remember much now. He still plays with his sheriff badge, but now it's framed in Hank's living room, beside a photo of his mother and a letter from the president thanking him for his bravery. Hank, when he speaks to veterans or church groups or grieving parents, always ends with the same words. Don't ignore the quiet ones. They see more than we ever will, and sometimes they carry the truth in their tiny hands. So what do we learn from this? That evil doesn't always come wearing black. Sometimes it smiles, it waves at parades, it shakes your hand. But no matter how shiny the badge, no matter how respected the uniform, the truth has a way of surfacing. Sometimes through paperwork, sometimes through pain, and sometimes through the trembling voice of a child too young to lie. That's the crusty lesson here. Don't let titles blind you. Don't let fear silence you. Because justice isn't a job. It's a calling. And it doesn't always come from the top. Sometimes it starts with a whisper in a courtroom and a little boy pointing at the man no one else dared to question.